All right, we're going to start off with some questions from me for my colleagues here. But also, I encourage you all to, if you haven't already downloaded the Whovu app, please do so, or sign into the web portal. We'd love to, it's going to be a conversation between us, but also between us and the audience, and both here and online. So please make sure you have questions ready, because otherwise I will talk the whole hour, and I need someone to pull me back from doing that. So, but in the meantime, moderator's prerogative, I'll start with some questions. Marjolijn, let's start with you. As Special Envoy for Space, what priorities have you been promoting regarding responsible behavior in space? And what are your goals in participating in ongoing multilateral space security discussions, such as the ongoing 4-year effort at the composite disarmament of the Open-Ended Working Group on the Prevention of Arms Race in Outer Space and all its aspects, or the OEWG? In fact, what were your recent takeaways from the meeting that happened in July? And should we be pleased or concerned about the discussions that have been held in support of the Open-Ended Working Group to date? A lot of questions.
Absolutely. How much time do you have?
We have 45 minutes total.
No, thanks so much for inviting Victoria. It's really great to be here, and it's always a pleasure to be in Paris. So I couldn't pass up on the opportunity. But about the Open-Ended Working Group on norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior, as well as potential legally binding instruments, the first priority for the EU has been to ensure that we have a balanced discussion on both possible legally binding instruments and non-legally binding instruments. As you know, as EU, we are championing a very inclusive approach to that. And we believe that non-legally binding instruments are the most important step that we can take at relatively short notice in discussions that can, in the end, move to legally binding instruments if need be. But we need to discuss the both of them. So that had been our priority, and that had been the agreement when the Open-Ended Working Group was set up. However, we saw that Russia used a lot of procedural maneuvering by trying to not have us talk about what we think is important, the non-legally binding instruments. But we've overcome that, and we're now finally starting to discuss the subject. Then our second priority has been to address the threats. On both the legal framework and the threats, we submitted working papers as EU to the second session, actually, right now in July. We are working to increasing the understanding of threats by all UN members. It's not only about any weapons being placed in space, as some are promoting. It really depends on what you do with your civilian infrastructure, how you use it, how you potentially turn it into a weapon. That is very much perceived as a threat by the EU and by many other states, by the way. So to explain why we also want to talk about that, I think was the second priority in this first year. And that is also very relevant for civilian space industry, because all assets in space are inherently dual use. So a civilian satellite can be used in ways which cause harm to other satellites. And we need to have rules of the road for that behavior as well. So those two priorities in this first year, and they serve our overall priority to bring more security and predictability to space, and to really start filling those governance gaps that we have. But you asked what my assessment was, should we be pleased or not? We are pleased that we now finally get to discuss substance and actual practical measures, and within the EU we are preparing for that for next year. Of course, we would have wanted to start that already in April, but unfortunately that was not possible. So looking forward to that substantial work, and at least happy that we've kicked it off.
As an outside observer, we're utterly delighted that we're no longer stuck in procedural motions and that some substantive discussions can happen. So congratulations to you guys for pushing that through. And thank you for bringing up dual use. That allows me to do an ad for tomorrow. We'll be discussing the increasingly blurred line between commercial and military space. So there'll be a fun panel discussion to dig into that as well. Next question, Esther. So you were the co-editor of a IISS report that came out early this year called Space Capabilities to Support Military Operations in the European Theater. And I believe that was uploaded to Hula. So if people are interested, you check it out there. One of the interesting dichotomies I saw coming out of the report was that there seemed to be competing takeaways. While member states at the EU level are working toward the development of common capabilities, the primary focus of individual national policies seems to be more centered on the development and strengthening of national defense capabilities. And while intergovernmental cooperation is being increasingly undertaken, particularly for space data exchange, overall your report notes that, quote, efforts to better harmonize European space activities are hampered by fragmentation and competing national interests, unquote. Could you talk us through this push-pull of national interests versus regional priorities?
Thank you, Victoria. First of all, thanks for the invite to this event. Yes, in the report that we published earlier this year, we actually analyzed some strategies from selected European countries, and we looked specifically at France, Germany, Italy, and Sweden as well to see how they perceive the space capabilities in support for military operations. And that allowed us also to enlarge actually the basis for the analysis to consider how European countries are looking at the integration of space into the military. And we can see that actually there are so many different approaches already from a policy perspective. So in Europe, only just few countries have specific space defense strategies, and even less have internal structures in the ministries of defense and armed forces to actually operate and to contribute to the different operations and integration of space data into their own activities. So this is the first aspect that also led to the evaluation that there actually are competing interests. So this leads also to a different understanding of what is actually possible to do. Is it the space to support other aspects, or is space considered a warfare scenario potentially? This has repercussions also when it comes to the type of capability development that they want to adopt, the timelines for the adoption of these capabilities. And of course, we also have highlighted in the report some other aspects that deal with the national industrial bases. We also, at the Institute, produced another report that looked specifically at how procurement is performed in the different sectors, not only on space. But if we look at space specifically, we see that there is no involvement of non-EU suppliers, for instance, when it comes to the infrastructures, and that is also connected to what is possible to develop. So on the one hand, we have the countries that have the most developed industries, and so in those cases, cooperation has an added value, a strong added value. So we see the development of the different activities. But then when it comes to substituting also what the countries already have, that is not something in question. So cooperation is an add-on to what countries are doing and to what they have. And then the last aspect before I give you back the floor is the fact that space has a dual-use aspect, but the military implications are a national competence. So military really remains a national competence. So the EU can support in framing the cooperation, the understanding and the harmonization, but then in the end it's up to member states to decide what are their own priorities, how they deal with it, and what type of capabilities and cooperation they want to pursue.
Definitely, it's interesting to see how the EU policy does shape and push national, and I think we'll probably get into that a little bit more later on this panel. So Bertrand, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of French space security policy. In 2018, the French Defense Minister, Florence Parly, talked about concerns France had with Russian satellites conducting uncoordinated close approaches to French satellites. 1 year later, French President Emmanuel Macron announced that France would be elevating the existing Joint Space Command within the French Air Force to be a full space command and renaming the French Air Force to be the Air and Space Force. In the half-decade since then, how has France evolved how it looks at space security capabilities and priorities, both in terms of policies and goals at the national level?
Thank you. Big questions, and obviously, thank you for having us around this table. Well, in almost 8 years, I would say much has been done, but not enough. My first answer would be, we are so happy, and I'm so glad to the guys before me to have produced this document, which was a key milestone. And everything that was in that document revealed true. I mean, we knew there would be some maneuvers. We knew that space was becoming a warfighting domain, to quote my US colleagues. And this happened, and we see it on an everyday basis. And so we are so happy to have this basic and this strategic document. The second point is we've been able to use this document to develop it at the interface between civilian and military operations. And there's a big concern in France nowadays that space is not only a military question, but it's also a civilian question. And in terms of strategy, and when I talk about strategy, I think about competition of powers, how to try to bend the other's will. In terms of competition, civilian systems are key and more easy to attack or to change than the military ones. So we've been doing, I think, a big job in raising our IQ and in some ways sharing it with our colleagues. We had a few measures in this document in 2018 about changing names, creating structures. We've been going through that. And for instance, President Macron will be opening the next buildings for the French Defense Command, the French Airspace Command, beginning of December. We've also progressed in terms of alliances with our Five Eyes colleagues. We've progressed in terms of capacities and capabilities, and this is key. But at the same time, I think we've spent square hours thinking in terms of what strategy means, what stability means, what escalation management means in space. So I will not share our thinking around in this audience because it's sometimes too classified. But we think that we must create many different passes, both to play in the open-ended working group domain with some limits maybe, but at the same time being able to defend and deter the others. And this is key. And for instance, in 2018, the strategy was mentioning defending our assets. So we're making this concept evolve within the boundaries we had in 2018. And we are moving to something that we would be able to call some kind of active defense, which is not only a way of considering war in space in terms of responding to an attack, but in ways to preventing an attack and being able to do some escalation management. So we are playing many cards at the same time, and maybe to our, and I keep telling it, and this is maybe my key word on that to my diplomat and to my colleagues from the MFA. We are happy to work on stability in space, provided it is legally binding, and you've mentioned that, but also in some ways universal. And this is the other point. We have some treaties, we have some agreements, but we have some people not fulfilling their commitments. And this is a big instability factor in what's coming on.
Yeah, I think that's where the role of diplomacy can have a very strong effect, because that's where you have discussions about, and we can come to agreement about what responsible actions are and what responsible actors can do. And that way you have you have something you can point to when there are people acting outside the norm and are doing things that are unstable. So they're not, I think gives these discussions a lot more force. So thank you for that. Let's go back to Maryland, actually, speak of the diplomatic angle. So last week, the European Commission and the High Representative proposed to EU member states the document Preserving Peace, Defense Readiness Roadmap 2030, which I understand is intended to strengthen European defense capabilities. Part of it includes something called a European Space Shield. Could you walk us through what that entails, and perhaps related to the reasoning for why the EU has done this? How does an increasingly inward-looking United States affect how Europe is strategizing the future of its strategic space capabilities?
Thanks very much for that question. Indeed, it's a very, very topical issue. To walk it back a little bit, you've all seen the EU Preparedness Union strategy that came out now almost a year ago, which very much focused on the whole of government, whole of society approach, but in which space already featured quite prominently, including a potential space shield, exactly because space is so important both for our defense and for our civilian life. In the spring, we saw the white paper, again, a joint communication by the High Representative and by the European Commission, which identified the priority capability areas in which we need to develop our capabilities in the EU. And that white paper comes from the view that the EU really needs to ramp up its defenses, and it needs to do so collectively. One of the areas that was identified was space as a strategic enabler. I think that's key, because space is not so much a domain in itself in defense terms, but it really relates a lot as an enabler to many other areas of defense. So that makes it a little bit different. Now, of course, paperwork is paperwork. So in order to implement that white paper, this roadmap was proposed last week. And it's actually under discussion tonight and tomorrow in the European Council by our heads of states and leaders of government for their endorsement of the vision in that. So this is the proposal that we put on the table, and it basically comes from two ideas. One is that we need to protect the assets that we have as EU and member states in space, so that our societies and also our militaries can continue to rely on them. And we've seen with the threats that this is a necessity. The other element is that defense organizations in EU member states have a need for space capabilities, for secure connectivity, for Earth observation. So the idea of the space shield is to very much increase to work with member states to see how we can best achieve those goals and to see how the EU space program can contribute to that. And that's called a space shield. You shouldn't think of it as a shield as in an Iron Dome or anything. It's shield because there's a number of other shields in there as well. So it's kind of in keeping with the language. But it's really assuring that we have access to space and that we access to services from space and that we keep those. So that's what this is about. We're keen to see what member states will say. Of course, not everything will be implemented by the EU, not by far. It's the member states first, and I think the roadmap also makes that very clear.
I know she didn't answer my question about the United States, which actually I'm going to kick open to the other panelists as well.
I could. Our relationship with the US on space is the oldest one that we have. We've now had the 13th iteration of our dialogue with them, which is a space dialogue and a space security dialogue back to back. We had all in all 100 people involved in that. And I think that really shows the depth and the breadth of the cooperation that we have on space with the US, long-standing, and that both sides are really keen to continue working on. So I see a very good engagement on both sides to continue that cooperation. It's key to both of us. Our space programs are intertwined historically. So that was a very good iteration, and we announced the next one to take place next year in Brussels.
That's great to hear, just because I feel like the messaging coming out of the White House is sometimes against international cooperation or more controversial than that. So it's great to hear you guys had a good conversation during that time frame. Before I ask my next question, just a reminder of the audience, we will be taking questions via Whova, again, either through the app or the web portal. So please feel free to add your questions to our speakers. And then, next is for Esther. Esther, could you build upon the themes you're seeing in terms of the growing roles of international partnerships and cooperation via the European Union and NATO in terms of space security? Is this solely in response to the increasing role of military space in Ukraine, being used in the war in Ukraine, or are there larger factors driving interest in this?
Thank you, Victoria. Ukraine definitely supported in having more cooperation on not only on space, but also on space and space in security and defense. But I would say that actually cooperation at EU level among European countries and with NATO as well is something that really is there since far longer, and just was strengthened due to the war in Ukraine. I mean, examples of that is not the case that already in 2019 NATO declared space as an operational domain, and in that declaration there was also the understanding that actually Europeans were lacking and far behind on ISR and SSA specifically. And so that was also a way towards which then European countries have been focusing more on this sort of capabilities as well. When it comes to EU cooperation, I would like to highlight one aspect of the cooperation that is specifically under the European Defence Fund framework. The EDF is supposed to foster research and development for the common development of military capabilities, and there are also some aspects that go on space. And if we look at the financial allocations in the period 2021 to 2023, we see that funds under the EDF for space specifically were covering around 10% of the money allocated in the EDF for those years. And you can say, okay, 10% is not that much. Actually, if you consider that there are 19 different categories for investments, then the situation is probably a little bit different. But that just to say that actually, I mean, cooperation is really focusing on, grouping together countries on those aspects that sort of constitute the drivers, so to say. And so to reply on that aspect of the question, I would say that at the EU level specifically, a strong focus has been on increasing the capabilities for launches and how to build that, how to do that cooperatively. And a lot of funds under the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe as well go on the development of these capabilities. Also, one other aspect that includes NATO as well is on having redundant data for the use of the militaries that go to the benefit of the military sector. And in that, I would just recall to what Marjolijn just said on the necessity to have member states contributing to that and being willing to really share their own assessments together with the different commercial actors that are more and more involved in the sector. But one aspect that I think can be of interest for the advancement of cooperation that relates also to how cooperation is performed in a transatlantic way is on the sharing, really the sharing of data and how those are regulated in a way when it comes specifically to the mega constellations, which is a topic that at the European level was not that developed until recently. That is just being developed just in the last period. So how to manage to combine different approaches when it comes to the integration also of commercial data is also another aspect that really will be a focus of cooperation both at the EU and at the NATO level, and how to combine those priorities among the different organizations.
When you're saying sharing data, what kind of data are you talking about?
Data in terms of data for SSA, but then the question for the military is really how do you use the encryption, the different level of encryptions, the different level of security clearances that are needed, the reliance when it comes to the commercial sector of the data, the time of the data in which the data is delivered, and so on and so forth. So regulations on those aspects, although regulations tend to slow down the way that the cooperation is performed, but probably needs to be defined to allow the countries, the cooperating countries, to have a certain level of trust on the way that cooperation is performed on that sort of sharing of data.
I know on the US side, one of the issues that they run into just in terms of international cooperation is also classification. Is that an issue at the European level as well?
Classification at the EU level is performed at the national level. And then when it comes to cooperation with the EU aspects of the cooperation, you also have a specific classification on that front. So each and every European country, as it happens obviously also in NATO, has its own classification system. And the question is to build the necessary trust among the cooperating partners to go lower in the chain of the classification.
Always a challenge. Thank you. Bertrand, we just heard a non-governmental perspective on the pathways and drivers for EU and NATO cooperation in space. Could you talk about how France is shaping its approach to EU space security priorities and NATO's efforts to mature the organization's space capacity and resources? And are there any policy harmonization issues that you see across member states for these multilateral organizations?
Yeah.
Good. Let's hear it.
No. First, I think that France, one of the key stakeholders in terms of cooperation in Europe since the beginning, and we've been pushing systems and data in the system, let it be through the Samson or let it be through supporting some new systems like IRIS². And we think that we're one of the key partners for space security in Europe through sharing data, through sharing, but also through sharing capabilities. First point. Second point, we think we try and play a big role in, I hate the term, but I will use it, raising the IQ of our colleagues. And this is, I think, essential. And we've already talked about this strategy. After that, having said that, talking about big European cooperation is always a matter of trying to mix many constraints of time schedules, concept of operations, willingness to do it. I could talk about strategic autonomy. Some colleagues will be pushing for more US systems because they're on the shelf. Some will say, okay, we know the US, and I see them about once a month. We know how they work, and we know the constraints they have to live with. When you were talking about classification of data, for instance, just to share one experiment, our colleagues, they tell us, our OSD colleagues tell us that they're ready to share data. The DOD, Department of War, sorry, is ready to share data.
Department of Defense.
Okay. My colleagues call it Department of War. But at the same time, they tell us we don't own the data because they're coming from the intelligence community. So it's always a tricky thing. So I have no perfect solution, but just my word on that is that Europe is at the beginning of a long path. It's a beginning of a long path, and we were talking on that with Marjolijn just before this roundtable, and we were saying that we probably have to move from national competition between European nations to something different. But this is pure politics. And this is something that plays a huge role in terms of defense policy. We are trying to push some things. France has been pushing strategic autonomy. France has always been advocating for industrial sovereignty. The road is long. We need to share that with our... And once we will have shared those concepts and we will have converged on those subjects, we will probably be able to build systems based on what my colleagues will call a best athletes role, and probably not the ESA approach, or which is an industry sharing being equal to the cost sharing, but something based on efficiency. I have to be optimistic. It's not in the DNA of my work in this ministry, but it's difficult. It's difficult, and probably it will come when we think that of the defense system from Mars, being seen from Mars and not being seen from Brussels, Berlin, Paris, Rome, or any other country. Interoperability is a key subject, obviously, but last but not least, you've mentioned access to space. I'm sorry to say that I always have to recall that Ariane group, the Ariane launcher was decided because the US refused to launch a European satellite in the 60s. So access to space is a key subject. And it's a long road. Once again, it's typical of places where we see some nations saying, we should rely on the US. I say, okay, they're our best ally, but not always. Thank you.
I wish I could disagree with you on that, but I think definitely the way things have gone just in the past, let's see, how long has it been since January? 9 months, there's been a real evolution, unfortunately, how the U.S. approaches this, which I think is unfortunate. Because again, from sitting in D.C., we hear kind of two different messages. You hear the Space Force saying repeatedly that the strongest asset for the United States is the U.S. commercial sector and the U.S. as allies and partners, and they do believe that. They released a commercial integration strategy last year. The Space Force released an international partnership strategy this year, and so which depends very heavily on that. But then you hear different approaches and messaging coming out elsewhere in the U.S. government, and I think that complicates the issue. Esther, I saw you writing something down during Bertrand's thought. And Marjolijn, you also looked very thoughtful about the part he was talking about, politics getting in the way. Maybe I can get your take first, Esther, on what you're thinking, and Marjolijn, what your response was, what Bertrand just said.
Yes, well, I was noting down when Bertrand was talking about the best athlete approach and the need to apply that also to space as well. And it is something that it is extremely complex really to do, because obviously here on that specifically you have so many different interests, not only to have national capabilities, but then when it comes to the industrial sector, to the type of skills that are needed as well. And if we look at the space sector in Europe, then you already know that there are only a few countries having a developed and strong industrial base for space. And that is that raises the question of, yes, how to improve this capacity, how to really make sure that in Europe there will be the possibility to have best athletes on the different, the entire spectrum of the sector. And then when you were mentioning the launches, one data came to mind, which is that actually in Europe, at the very beginning, Europeans were quite advanced in doing space launches, and they were covering a good part of the world demand for space launches. And today, in a decade of launches of Ariane and Vega C, you have the same, I mean, basically, sorry, we reformulate that. So basically...
I see what you, I receive every Musk notification about the next
exactly,
launch,
on the number of Starlink launches.
Yeah, I have
only in the first part,
exactly,
only in the first part of the year compared to the cumulative number of launches between the last decade, basically, of Ariane and Vega C, the entire families of the launches. And that was something that just came to mind when I was listening to you.
Marjolijn, what are your thoughts on this?
From an EU perspective, now is really the time to move forward and to not let this be dictated by politics. The documents that I mentioned don't come out of nowhere. It is because there is a threat to the EU, to Europe, that we need to act on, that we need to prepare for. There is a sense of urgency. It's 2030 is the year mentioned in that roadmap. But we also need to do it together. I think that is a key element of that whole debate. It's member states, it's the EU, but it's in full complementarity with NATO and also cooperating with other organizations. How we do that, as Esther said, is extremely complex, but now is the time to design how we do that and then get on with it.
Definitely. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions coming in from the audience. I don't know if that's because the iPad is not loading them or they're not there, but that leaves more time for me. So kind of, I would love to get kind of your big thoughts. I mean, you brought up the roadmap to 2030, and so it's 5 years away. And one of the questions I want to get your guys' take on is, over the next 5 years, where do you see the countries or entities, organizations of Europe having the most success in terms of carrying out these evolving space security priorities? And where do you see the most room for improvement? And for the latter, is it a matter of just insufficient political leadership, which I think we may know Bertrand's response on that, but let's hear everyone else, unclear budgetary commitments, or something else entirely? And how can that be counteracted? So looking ahead the next 5 years, where do you guys see this evolving? Who wants to take this first? Esther's reaching for the mic.
I will start. That is more a necessity rather than, well, actually, I see this developing, but it is really a necessity when it comes to having long-term financial allocations that can be foreseen in advance, so to say. So the long-term financial commitment has not been there for the majority of European countries, and on that, I mean, with some exceptions, obviously, but that is one of the aspects that I would say is where they have to work the most. And on that, it is not only something that has to be done at the national level, but also that is a perfect excuse to exploit the incentives that the European Union is able to offer. So we are now in the moment, in the period of in the timeline of seeing the EU actors negotiating the new multi-annual financial framework that will enter into force from 2028, so basically the EU budget. And the proposal at the moment is to have a total of 131 billion to be spent over a 7-year 5-year period for space and defense. And we also heard the Defense Commissioner Kubilin saying that probably that amount of money may be, but this is something to be developed and discussed further, may be split into half between space and defense. And that would really mean that the European Union will have a stronger push into fostering that cooperation for starting from capability development, but going forwards also to the further harmonization of the different policies at national level, and they see that being one aspect of good development, probably hope for a more structural approach.
Great, thank you. Bertrand, let's go down the line.
Thank you. I'd rather think in terms of potential failures than thinking in terms of success. And I have a few ideas of where we can fail in Europe in the next 5 coming years. There's obviously one subject which is key to us, which is IRIS². I think that succeeding that will be a key message to Europe, will be a key message to our US colleagues who are keeping advocating us to take our destiny at hands. Having to tackle a space crisis and not being able to play, to be at the table as a European structure, but looking at our US and maybe Russians or Chinese, I don't know, colleagues talking about us as the menu and not being around the table would be a failure. So we need to, and the last probably would be being overwhelmed by a capability by someone owned by someone else, who would be a key game changer. And what strikes me is probably the fact that our ability to develop systems and to converge on some systems is probably lower than what I call the technological speed or the speed of history. So we might, and I haven't found yet what, but there's always kind of a strategic surprise. We might be overwhelmed by something we haven't seen yet. Because some other countries are putting so much money on the space that they will find out something different. So those could be the 3 main domains where I would say a European failure would be a catastrophe to us.
Hopefully that won't be what happens. Marjolijn, final thoughts.
So the roadmap and all the planning are actually designed to avoid these failures. So I'm hoping that we will be able to do so, because as you say, it's crucial that we do and that we move forward. We have the funds at least proposed in the MFF. We also have a number of other instruments like the SAFE instrument, ADF, EPF, etc. We have the fora for discussing between member states and between institutions. We have the important work of the EDA in this context. We have the Commission Space Programme and its working groups. We have the ecosystem. What we need now is this unity of purpose in order to get there. We might identify, depending on the wishes of the member states, a few gaps in our architecture that we might need to fix and that we might need to work on, especially making sure we have that vision in which areas are of the highest priority for all of the member states to work on.
Right. Well, and an point of optimism. So hopefully when we come back here in 5 years, or just to take this topic again, we'll see all sorts of progress and evolution and maturation. So please join me in thanking this panel for a fantastic discussion.